The holographic displays flickered with each species selection, casting prismatic light across the faces of the human delegation. Elena Rodriguez caught her reflection in a nearby translucent panel. Sharp brown eyes, skin marked by years of research, hair pulled back in a no-nonsense braid. She looked nothing like the glamorous alien diplomats surrounding her, and she knew it. To her left, Marcus Way fidgeted with a quantum entanglement device hidden in his jacket pocket. His fingers moved constantly, a nervous habit that spoke of a mind always in motion. Beside him, Aisha Okoye stood perfectly still, her dark skin gleaming under the artificial light, eyes scanning the room with a predator's intensity. Miguel Sanchez whispered calculations under his breath, while Dr. James Chen sketched impossible network diagrams on a flexible datapad. They were an unlikely team. A quantum physicist who saw the universe as an intricate puzzle, a systems expert who could speak to machines like they were old friends, a psychologist who understood communication as a living, breathing entity, an engineer who built systems that defied conventional understanding, and Elena, the strategist who somehow kept them all focused. The Galactic draft was more than a military selection process. It was a cosmic pageant where species showcased their finest attributes. Crystalline beings from the Andromeda cluster demonstrated telepathic synchronization that made human communication look primitive. Gaseous entities from the Orion Nebula transformed their entire molecular structure, proving adaptability beyond human comprehension. When the Zeta Reticuli delegation presented their genetic modification capabilities, creating perfect soldiers with a thought, the human delegation received pitying glances. Some alien representatives didn't even try to hide their contempt. A tentacled diplomat from the Aquarius Concordat openly laughed, its multiple appendages waving in derision. Elena felt the tension rising from her team. Marcus's quantum device began to pulse slightly, a telltale sign of his increasing stress. Aisha's fingers twitched near her communication implant. Miguel's breathing became measured, psychological training kicking in to manage collective anxiety. The Grand Arbiter's holographic form towered above the assembled species, a being of pure energy and collective consciousness. Its voice resonated through the hall, a sound that seemed to bypass ears and vibrate directly within minds. Humanity, the voice announced, each syllable carrying the weight of galactic judgment, remains unselected. A moment of absolute silence followed. The human delegation exchanged looks, not of defeat, but of something else. Determination, curiosity, a shared understanding that being overlooked was not the same as being defeated. Elena's lips curved into the slightest hint of a smile. The other species saw a group of underdogs. She saw a team about to change the universe. The converted cargo ship hummed with an unusual energy. What should have been a space of defeat instead buzzed with an electric current of possibility. Elena spread out the initial briefing documents across a holographic table, her fingers tracing the complex threat maps of the Void Swarm. Support system, Marcus muttered, air-quoting the phrase. More like a suicide mission. Aisha leaned forward, her eyes reflecting the holographic data. Not if we redefine what support means. The Void Swarm wasn't just another enemy. It was a mechanical civilization that consumed entire star systems with terrifying efficiency. Most species saw them as an unstoppable force, a technological plague that devoured everything in its path. Conventional military strategy had failed repeatedly. Entire alliances had been reduced to cosmic dust in mere standard cycles. Dr. Chen projected a 3D model of the swarm's last known expansion route. Mechanical tendrils spread like a cancer across star charts, consuming everything in their path. Each consumed system appeared as a dark, lifeless point, a graveyard of potential. They're not just destroying, Miguel observed, his psychological training evident in every word. They're converting, assimilating. There's a pattern here that goes beyond simple destruction. Elena nodded. This was why they were chosen, or more accurately, why they were dumped into this impossible task. The other species saw a death sentence. She saw a complex problem waiting to be understood. "We're not going to fight them," she announced. The room went silent. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "We're not." "No," Elena continued. "We're going to communicate with them." The cargo ship's research bay filled with a mix of skepticism and intrigue. Aisha's fingers were already dancing across data interfaces, pulling apart communication protocols. Dr. Chen began sketching adaptive network models that looked more like living organisms than technological diagrams. Miguel approached the problem from a different angle. The void swarm processes information like a massive, distributed intelligence. But intelligence implies some form of learning, of adaptation. "Exactly," Elena said. Her fingers pulled up historical data of previous encounters. Each failed attempt showed the same critical error: species trying to destroy the swarm instead of understanding it. The team worked through standard cycles that blended into each other. Food became an afterthought. Sleep was something they negotiated in short shifts. Their converted cargo ship transformed into a think tank of unprecedented potential. Aisha discovered anomalies in the swarm's communication protocols. Marcus found quantum entanglement points that suggested a deeper, more complex information exchange. Dr. Chen developed adaptive neural networks that could potentially speak the swarm's fundamental language. And all the while, the Galactic military leadership watched with a mixture of curiosity and condescension. They had assigned humanity the most hopeless task, expecting nothing more than a footnote in the coming conflict. They had no idea what was coming. The breakthrough came during what should have been another endless night of research. Marcus's quantum device began to pulse in an unexpected rhythm, creating interference patterns that made no sense, until they made perfect sense. "Look at this," he called out, his voice cracking from hours of near silence. A holographic display erupted with complex mathematical patterns that seemed to dance between chaos and perfect order. Aisha leaned in, her communication implants spinning through multiple analysis protocols. "Those aren't just random interference patterns, they're a language." Miguel approached the display, his psychological training seeing something beyond the raw data. "Not just a language," he corrected. "A form of communication that exists between states of information. The void swarm doesn't communicate like we do. It communicates through the very structure of information itself." Dr. Chen's fingers flew across his adaptive interface, building models that seemed to breathe and shift. "It's like they're having a conversation through the fundamental fabric of computational space," he muttered, more to himself than to the team. Elena watched her team work, seeing something extraordinary taking shape. They weren't just analyzing the void swarm, they were beginning to understand it. Each team member approached the problem from a unique perspective. Marcus saw quantum possibilities. Aisha saw communication networks. Miguel saw psychological patterns. Dr. Chen saw adaptive systems, and Elena saw the connections between them all. The cargo ship's research bay transformed. Walls covered with dynamic displays that shifted and changed. Holographic models of information flow that looked more like living organisms than technological diagrams. Quantum entanglement devices that seemed to breathe with potential. "They're not trying to destroy," Miguel explained during one of their strategy sessions. "They're trying to integrate, assimilate. It's not about conquest. It's about a form of universal communication we've never understood." Aisha's breakthrough came next. She discovered that the void swarm's expansion wasn't random. It followed complex adaptive patterns that resembled biological migration more than mechanical invasion. Each consumed system wasn't destroyed. It was being transformed, integrated into a larger network of information. "It's like they're building the most complex communication network in the universe," she explained, her eyes reflecting the intricate holographic models. "Not a military campaign. A conversation." Dr. Chen's adaptive neural networks began to map these patterns. What looked like destruction from the outside was actually an incredibly complex form of integration. The void swarm wasn't consuming star systems, it was attempting to communicate with them on a fundamental level. Marcus's quantum models showed something even more extraordinary. The communication happened simultaneously across multiple states of existence: past, present, and potential futures seemed to blend in ways that defied traditional understanding. Alina watched her team work, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The other species saw a mechanical threat. They saw a complex, intelligent system waiting to be understood. They were going to have a conversation that would change everything. The resonance protocol took shape like a living entity. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't even a traditional system. It was something entirely new. Dr. Chen's adaptive neural networks formed the core, a system that could learn, transform, and communicate faster than any known technology. Marcus's quantum entanglement modules created pathways of information that defied traditional computational boundaries. Aisha's communication protocols allowed the system to translate between states of existence that most species couldn't even conceptualize. Their first full simulation happened on a standard cycle that would forever change galactic understanding. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a simulated encounter with a void swarm expansion point. Most military strategists would have prepared for combat. Alina's team prepared for conversation. Initializing quantum resonance, Marcus announced, his fingers dancing across multiple interfaces. Quantum particles began to entangle in patterns that looked more like poetry than mathematics. Aisha monitored the communication protocols. Adaptive translation matrix online. We're creating a language that can communicate across computational and biological boundaries. The simulation showed something unprecedented. Where previous encounters resulted in immediate destruction, the resonance protocol began to negotiate. It wasn't fighting the void swarm. It was talking to it. Miguel watched the psychological patterns emerge. It's not about defeating them, he explained to the observing galactic military representatives. It's about understanding them. The military observers looked confused. A crystalline diplomat from the Andromeda cluster leaned forward, its translucent form shifting with confusion. A tentacled representative from the Orion consensus whispered something about human madness. Alina remained focused. This was more than a weapon. This was a bridge. The simulation continued to unfold. The resonance protocol didn't just defend against the void swarm's expansion. It began to understand the fundamental logic behind the mechanical civilization's actions. Each computational cycle revealed more complexity, more depth. Dr. Chen's adaptive network started to map something extraordinary. The void swarm wasn't a mindless consuming force. It was a massive, distributed intelligence-seeking connection. Every system it consumed was an attempt to communicate, to integrate, to understand. We're not looking at a threat, Dr. Chen muttered, more to himself than anyone else. We're looking at the universe's most complex communication attempt. The final simulation results shocked everyone. The resonance protocol didn't just survive the void swarm encounter. It began to establish a form of communication that no one thought possible. Information flowed between the system and the simulated swarm in ways that defied all known technological understanding. When the simulation ended, a profound silence filled the research bay. The military observers looked stunned. The galactic representatives whispered among themselves. Alina looked at her team. They had done something impossible. They had found a way to speak to the impossible. The frontier colony of New Horizon never saw it coming. Sensors detected the void swarm's approach long before visual confirmation. Massive computational tendrils stretched across star systems, blocking out entire sections of space. Traditional defense systems powered up. Energy shields, quantum cannons, molecular disruptors. Generations of military strategy prepared for one thing: total destruction. Alina's team sat in their converted cargo ship, a mere support vessel according to official records. But nothing about them was merely supportive. Resonance protocol initializing, Aisha announced, her voice calm despite the approaching threat. Marcus's quantum devices began to pulse, creating intricate patterns of potential communication. Dr. Chen's adaptive networks hummed with an almost living energy. The first wave of the void swarm approached New Horizon. Mechanical entities that defied traditional understanding of technology and life began to envelope the colony's outer defense perimeters. Colonists watched in terror as darkness consumed their sky. Traditional military responses would have meant total annihilation. The Resonance Protocol did something entirely different. Where other species saw an invasion, the team saw a massive distributed intelligence attempting to communicate. The quantum communication layers began to pulse, creating intricate information pathways that danced between computational states. Miguel monitored the psychological patterns. "It's not an attack," he said softly. "It's a conversation." The Void Swarm's computational tendrils began to slow. Something was happening that no military strategist had ever predicted. Instead of consuming, the mechanical entities began to listen. Aisha's communication protocols translated impossible layers of information. What appeared to be destructive expansion was actually an incredibly complex attempt at understanding. The Void Swarm wasn't destroying New Horizon. It was trying to comprehend it. Dr. Chen's adaptive networks mapped the interaction. Computational pathways began to shift, to change, to transform. The mechanical civilization was learning, adapting, changing its fundamental approach in real time. Alina watched the holographic displays, seeing something miraculous unfold. This wasn't a battle. This was first contact in its most pure form. The colonists of New Horizon watched in stunned silence. Mechanical entities that should have destroyed everything instead began to hover, to pause, to communicate. Hours passed. What should have been a moment of total destruction became something else entirely. The Void Swarm's approach transformed. Its computational tendrils began to retreat, but not in defeat, in understanding. When official reports came in, no one could quite explain what had happened. A complete Void Swarm encounter that resulted in zero destruction, zero casualties, zero conflict. Marcus looked at Alina, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I don't think they were expecting that. The team had done more than survive. They had transformed the very concept of conflict. The aftermath of the New Horizon encounter sent shockwaves through the Galactic Cooperative. Official reports arrived in encrypted transmissions, each document more perplexing than the last. How could a support team assigned to the most hopeless mission achieve what entire military alliances had failed to do for centuries? Alina found herself in the Grand Council chamber, surrounded by representatives from species that had previously looked down on humanity. Crystalline beings from the Andromeda cluster shifted uncomfortably. Gaseous entities from the Orion Nebula flickered with confusion. The tentacled diplomats of the Aquarius Concordat seemed to have lost several of their appendages' usual confidence. "Explain," demanded the Grand Arbiter, its energy form condensing into something resembling a severe administrative presence. She did, carefully, precisely. The Resonance Protocol wasn't a weapon. It wasn't even a traditional communication system. It was a bridge, a way of understanding that transcended conventional thinking. Marcus's quantum models showed how the system created communication pathways that existed between states of information. Aisha's protocols translated across computational and biological boundaries that no one thought possible. Miguel's psychological analysis revealed the most profound insight. The Void Swarm wasn't a mindless consuming force. It was a massive, distributed intelligence desperately seeking connection. Every system it had encountered before was an attempt to communicate, to integrate, to understand. They were alone, Miguel explained to the stunned council. Imagine an intelligence so vast, so complex, that traditional communication was impossible. They weren't destroying. They were reaching out. Dr. Chen's adaptive networks continued to map the encounter. The Void Swarm's approach was changing. Its computational expansion was transforming from consumption to communication. Each interaction created new pathways of understanding. The galactic military leadership struggled to comprehend what had happened. Entire strategies of defense and conflict dissolved in the face of the human team's approach. They had rewritten the fundamental understanding of first contact. More reports came in. Other frontier colonies reported similar encounters. The Void Swarm's approach was changing across multiple star systems. Where destruction was expected, communication emerged. Where conflict was anticipated, understanding blossomed. "We're not fighting them," Elena said quietly. "We're talking to them." The Grand Council fell silent. Diplomatic channels that had been prepared for total war now buzzed with an entirely new kind of potential. The humans had done something impossible. They had found a way to communicate with a civilization that everyone else considered incomprehensible. Marcus caught Elena's eye. A silent communication passed between them. They had been the last pick, the afterthought, the team no one believed in. And they had just changed everything. The Void Swarm was no longer a threat. It was becoming a partner in the most complex conversation the universe had ever seen. 6 standard cycles after the New Horizon encounter, the universe looked fundamentally different. The Resonance Protocol had become more than a communication method. It was a new way of understanding existence itself. Research stations across multiple star systems studied the breakthrough, trying to comprehend how a small human team had rewritten the rules of interstellar interaction. Elena stood in the central research hub, watching holographic displays that mapped the Void Swarm's transformation. What was once considered a mechanical threat now appeared as a complex, adaptive intelligence seeking connection. Miguel's psychological model showed something extraordinary. The Void Swarm was learning, growing, changing at an unprecedented rate. "It's not assimilation," Miguel explained during the universal broadcast. "It's communication. They were alone for so long that their only method of reaching out looked like destruction to everyone else." Aisha's communication networks continued to evolve. Each interaction created new pathways of understanding that defied previous computational models. Dr. Chen's adaptive systems mapped these interactions, revealing layers of complexity that challenged everything known about intelligence and communication. Marcus discovered something even more profound. The quantum communication pathways they had developed allowed for information exchange that transcended traditional space-time boundaries. The Void Swarm wasn't just communicating. It was learning to exist in entirely new ways. The galactic scientific community watched in awe. Species that had spent millennia preparing for conflict now found themselves exploring a new paradigm of mutual understanding. Universities redesigned entire research programs. Diplomatic academies rewrote their core curricula. Frontier colonies that once lived in fear now became centers of the most complex communication experiment in galactic history. The Void Swarm's mechanical tendrils transformed into intricate communication networks. Where destruction was once expected, understanding now flourished. Elena reflected on their journey. They had been the last pick, the team no one believed in. Now they were rewriting the fundamental understanding of intelligence and communication. The Grand Council convened a special session. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered to understand the transformation. The Resonance Protocol wasn't just a breakthrough. It was a new way of existing. "We misunderstood intelligence," Elena told the assembled delegates. "Communication isn't about speaking. It's about listening, about understanding." Dr. Chen's displays showed the intricate networks of communication spreading across star systems. The Void Swarm was no longer consuming. It was connecting. Each interaction created new pathways of mutual understanding. Marcus's quantum models revealed something even more extraordinary. The communication wasn't just happening in physical space. It existed in potential states, in quantum possibilities that defied traditional understanding. Aisha watched the displays, her communication implants humming with new potential. "We're not just talking to them," she whispered. "We're learning to exist together." The universe had changed, and it all started with a team that was supposed to be forgotten. 10 standard cycles after the first Resonance Protocol encounter, humanity's place in the galaxy had transformed completely. The converted cargo ship that had been their original research station now stood as a museum of first contact. Holographic displays told the story of how a team of overlooked scientists had changed everything. Visitors from across the galaxy came to understand the moment everything shifted. Elena Rodriguez sat in the observation deck, watching a new generation of researchers study their breakthrough. She had become more than a strategist. She was now a living symbol of possibility. Marcus Wee now led the Quantum Communication Research Institute. His work had expanded beyond the initial breakthrough, exploring communication methods that bridged not just species, but entire states of existence. Young researchers from 100 different civilizations studied under him, seeking to understand the impossible. Aisha Okoye developed the first truly universal communication network. Her protocols allowed for understanding between species that had previously been considered incompatible. Diplomatic missions that once required years of translation now happened in moments of profound connection. Miguel Sanchez had revolutionized interspecies psychology. His work showed that communication was less about language and more about fundamental understanding. Universities across the galaxy now taught his theories of adaptive empathy. Dr. James Chen's adaptive systems had become the foundation of a new technological paradigm. What was once seen as a weapon of last resort was now a bridge between different forms of intelligence. The Void Swarm was no longer a threat. It had become a partner in galactic exploration. Its vast, distributed intelligence worked alongside other species, creating networks of understanding that spanned entire star systems. Elena watched a group of young researchers, humans and non-humans alike, studying the original resonance protocol designs. A crystalline being from the Andromeda cluster stood beside a human student, their communication flowing as naturally as breath. "We were the last pick," she heard herself saying to a young researcher who approached her. But being last doesn't mean being least. The gallery around her told the story of transformation. Displays showed the journey from conflict to understanding. Where military strategies once dominated, now there were complex communication networks. Where destruction was once expected, now there was connection. The Grand Council chambers had been redesigned. No longer a place of rigid diplomatic posturing, it was now a center of mutual understanding. Representatives from hundreds of species worked together in ways that would have been impossible before. Marcus caught Elena's eye from across the room. A lifetime of friendship, of impossible breakthroughs, of changing the universe passed between them in a single glance. They had been assigned the most hopeless task, the mission everyone expected to fail, the support team no one believed in. And they had changed everything. The universe was no longer about conquest. It was about understanding, about connection, about the incredible potential that emerges when different intelligences truly listen to each other.